Hi everyone, welcome back. I've been rewatching Stranger Things Season 5, and the more closely I look at the details, the more the storytelling patterns become impossible to ignore. A few moments stood out to me in a much clearer way this time, especially when it comes to how the show is positioning Mike, Elle, and Will. So today I want to break down those scenes one by one and explain why the narrative direction overwhelmingly points toward Byler. Right away in episode 1, something stood out to me. Mike and Elle are on the roof talking about a metaphorical D&D campaign, and Mike says that in his campaigns, if the party wins, then they all live happily ever after. Elle immediately tries to interpret that as him talking about their romantic happily ever after together and asks, "Do you think that could be real for us?" Mike dodges the question. He says, "Yeah, of course," but instead of acknowledging their relationship the way she intends, he immediately pivots back to the logistics of the fantasy world, saying the three waterfalls part isn't possible, but the other stuff is. He avoids confirming the romantic implication she was fishing for. He answers her, but not in the way she wanted. It's careful, strategic dodging, exactly like what we've seen from him in his past behavior. When I got to episode 2, I noticed something about the ring. In a scene when Elle accidentally attacks Hopper, she's still wearing Mike's ring on her right hand. I know I already touched on the ring, but I noticed something I haven't talked about before. As I kept watching the exact same upside-down scene, I noticed that when she was tending to Hopper's wounds, the ring had switched to her left hand. That means the switching of the ring means virtually nothing, because Millie is most likely the one moving it, and they simply didn't keep the shots consistent. The fact she is wearing the ring might matter symbolically, but the placement doesn't. I emphasized my concern about this ring placement in a prior video, and I'm honestly relieved to now be clear that the placement does not matter. This is the proof. It switches hands within the same scene, so it cannot be a narrative signal. It's just a filming inconsistency. As episode 2 continues, something else becomes clear when you pay attention to how the season is structured. Nancy and Jonathan are written to mirror Mike and Elle. Jonathan buys a ring because he feels the relationship slipping away, mirroring Elle clinging to a relationship that is drifting. The season places these two relationships side by side on purpose, so the audience notices the parallels. For example, there's the scene in the car where Jonathan and Steve are fighting. Jonathan accuses Steve of trying to get Nancy back, and Jonathan is right. Steve does want Nancy, and Steve lashes out by accusing Jonathan of focusing so much on made-up drama that he can't see how unhappy Nancy actually is. Steve lies when he says he only sees Nancy as a friend, but everything else he says in that moment is true. He's calling out Jonathan for misreading the emotional reality of his own relationship. And this mirrors Elle misreading Mike, not because she's unintelligent, but because she's terrified of losing him. Both relationships are drifting, and the show lines these parallels up deliberately. Then in episode 4, right before Will gets his powers, there's the shoulder tap moment that a lot of people use to argue that Mike doesn't reciprocate. The claim is basically Will was testing Mike after Robin's advice. Mike didn't hit him back. Will looked sad. Robin looked sad. Therefore, Mike doesn't feel anything. But this scene could actually mean the exact opposite. Let me explain. Mike normally reacts very differently when his friends tease him physically. With Lucas or Dustin, he either looks annoyed or he instantly shoves them back in a playful way. That's his standard automatic friend response. But with Will, he doesn't do either of those things. When Will taps his shoulder, Mike pauses, softens, and gives this very warm, gentle smile. Something he has never shown in response to Lucas or Dustin doing the same thing. It's a completely different emotional reaction. Only after that warmth do we see the confusion, the emotional panic, and the withdrawal. That is not the body language of someone who feels nothing. That is the body language of someone fighting a feeling. And for anyone still insisting that Robin looked sad in that moment, the screenshots actually tell a very different story. Robin's expression before Mike turns away and her expression after are almost identical, and neither one looks sad. What they show instead is recognition. Robin already understood that Will was gay, but in that moment she's realizing something new, that Mike is the person Will has feelings for, And because Robin most likely understood that Will was lightly testing Mike with that shoulder tap, her expression shifts into quiet understanding, not pity. She's observing, processing, connecting dots, not feeling sorry for him. If she believed Mike didn't care about Will, her reaction would look very different from this. Some people also argue that Mike stepped back because he already knew Will liked him and didn't want to give him the wrong idea. But when you look at the actual moment, that interpretation doesn't hold up. If Mike didn't return Will's feelings and was trying not to lead him on, his body language would start off tense or uncomfortable, the kind of stiff posture or forced smile people use when they're trying to avoid hurting a friend. Instead, the first thing we see is Mike giving Will a soft smile before shifting into confusion and panic. And that sequence, warmth first, then being thrown off, then pulling back, doesn't look like someone gently shutting a friend down. It looks like someone suddenly feeling something they weren't ready for and not knowing how to process it. Immediately after that moment is the sink scene, which is also in episode 4. Mike and Will are lying on their stomachs, shoulder to shoulder, hands brushing while they fix a leaking pipe together. This is not a natural or practical way to fix a sink. The normal way would be kneeling underneath it or sitting beside it. The only explanation for staging it this way is that it was intentional by the directors. If it was intentional, then it was chosen specifically to evoke intimacy, unresolved longing, and emotional closeness. All things the audience is meant to pick up on. Scenes like this are never accidents. Then there's Robin's motivational speech. I won't get into it here because I already talked about it in my previous video. A lot of people claim that Mike is Will's Tammy. The same way Robin had Tammy as a distraction, but I already deconstructed why I don't think that comparison holds up. And finally, the argument I keep hearing over and over to disprove Byler is that Mike and Elle have been together in pretty much every season, so it makes zero sense for the writers to break them apart now. The claim is that doing so wouldn't move the story forward, or that the audience was set up specifically for Mike and Elle to be endgame. But to disprove that, I don't have to look any further than the Wonder Years. We were set up for an entire series to believe that Kevin and Winnie would be the final couple. There was absolutely nothing to suggest otherwise. Yet the writers still chose to break them apart at the very end, and we never even got to see the woman Kevin ultimately married. That alone proves that writers will do whatever they want, regardless of what audiences assume or expect. So when someone tells me that no writer would ever break up the main couple after seasons of build-up, there is simply no real reason to believe that. Storytelling history is full of examples where writers follow the emotional truth of the characters, not the assumed trajectory. And honestly, if Mileven fans want to present actual evidence, I'm completely fine with that. The ring itself, the fact that Mike gave Elle a ring at all, is a powerful piece of symbolism that absolutely deserves discussion. And if people have behavioral analyses that genuinely support Mileven being the intended pairing instead of Byler, that's totally fair to talk about too. But arguments that have no backing or arguments that crumble the second you compare them to examples from other shows don't make sense to me. There is no reason to discredit Byler simply because it doesn't fit someone's personal narrative. Thanks so much for watching. I'd really love to hear your thoughts, interpretations, or any evidence you've noticed in the comment section, whether it supports Byler or not. This is a discussion I enjoy having, and every perspective helps deepen the analysis. See you in the next one.